let's start the show. You know, it's one of those weird things I find myself stuck in as a reviewer. In my first season, I decided to review both Valkyria Chronicles and Valkyria Revolution. Not with any intended focus other than the fact that I spent money on them, so I might as well talk about them. Earlier this year, I decided to livestream my playthrough of Valkyria Chronicles 4, which I took out from the local library. Despite the fact that the footage chose not to properly import, I decided to then reshoot everything, and thus here we are. Will this latest installment hit the marks like the original Valkyria Chronicles, or misfire like Valkyria Revolution? Let's find out. It's time to once again join me on the battlefield as I review Valkyria Chronicles 4. How nostalgic. Although it feels somewhat different. For one, there's a lot more snow. Also, I've gained a bit of weight, but I'll work that off. Welcome once again to the year 1934 EC, where conflict between the East European Imperial Alliance, the Axis, and the Atlantic Federation, the Allies, ignited, plunging the world into the Second European War. Our story begins in the Atlantic Federation, where after losing 30% of their territory to the Empire, they hatch a plan to send in a group of elite Gallian soldiers behind enemy lines. Their goal? To take down the Empire once and for all. Before we dive into the game, it's time for a little background. Valkyria Chronicles originally started as a PlayStation 3 game that was released in 2008, which spawned into a multi-game franchise. The second and third installments were released on the PSP, but only the second game was ported outside of Japan. In 2017, SEGA attempted to create a spin-off called Valkyria Revolution, a game I previously reviewed and remember as a fairly mediocre experience which did nothing exceptionally. Valkyria Chronicles 4 was released on March 21st, 2018 onto the PlayStation 4, Xbox One, Nintendo Switch, Google Stadia, and PC. It was developed and published by SEGA, produced by Kei Mikami, and directed by Kohei Yamashita and Masaya Kobayashi. Valkyria Chronicles 4 is the story of Claude Wallace. Claude is the empathetic, compassionate, and level-headed leader of the Gallian Military Ranger Corps, Squad E. He's joined alongside by Sergeant Raz, who is loud, hot-headed, and considers himself invincible. Lena Shulin, a sniper who operates under her brother's name Kai. Miles Arbeck, a timid tank engineer who frankly I'd be shocked if he wasn't a reimagining of Tails from the Sonic franchise. Minerva Victor, the leader of Squad F and holding an unrequited rivalry against Claude. Finally, rounding out the main cast is Science Officer Riley Miller, who blames Claude for the death of her family in a fire. If you didn't pick up on that last line, let me just say, the story of Valkyria Chronicles 4 isn't going to be one of sunshine, lollipops, and rainbows, which I actually applaud. No, seriously, war isn't some summer camp where a ragtag group of friends have a bonding experience and escape without PTSD. It's a senseless waste of life where usually those who make the decision for their nation to go to war are not the ones actually fighting on the front lines. A vast majority of the deaths in war are either brainwashed soldiers thinking their cause was just, or the poor who have no other options but to put their lives on the line. It's a tale as old as time. So you'll be playing through the game, and occasionally you're going to see some people bite the dust. It's just a shame that a vast majority of the people you see die are generic soldiers who all use the same character model, thus desensitizing the player to the horrors of war. But I digress. One of the major themes from the previous games that is surprisingly absent in this title is the racial prejudice against Darkson people. Darksons are an incredibly industrial people known for their bluish-black hair. Due to a fable, Darksons are considered lesser humans. Imperials, as a result, like to hunt Darksons for sport or force them to work in concentration camps until they die of starvation or unsafe working conditions. If you didn't pick up on this, yes, the Darksons are a stand-in for the Jewish people during the Holocaust. The first Valkyria Chronicles had plot points dedicated to prejudice, and while I feel they could have done more with it, especially since members of Squad 7 have racism against Darksons as a negative status effect, SEGA at least does a basic job to state racism and bigotry is stupid. Valkyria Chronicles 4 doesn't really do much with those previous themes other than maybe a few references that the Empire doesn't like Darksons. Kinda like Inglourious Bastards, it's all about the elite team of soldiers planning to end the war by any means necessary. Less about actual horrors of anime World War II. While I applaud the game for being more grounded in reality, it doesn't change how incredibly predictable the story is. During my Twitch playthrough, I was casually joking about which plot points were going to show up and which characters were probably not going to make it to the end of the adventure. Now, while I admit to getting emotional during the unfolding of the story, it still doesn't change the fact that my predictions were 100% accurate. When that usually happens, I'm not proud of myself for being right, just disappointed the writers couldn't play with my expectations. Frankly speaking, from a story perspective, Valkyria Chronicles 4 has a solid beginning and ending, but the parts in between muddle it down. Throughout the game, there's this repeating theme of sacrifice. It kind of makes sense since Squad E is practically on a suicide mission, however, because of the story pacing, a lot of the sacrifice feels like it was pointless. That if Squad E chose at one point to just wait things out, they wouldn't have to deal with the suffering that will befall them. Now, I understand war is the cooperative effort of many different groups fighting together. At the same time as Valkyria Chronicles 4, 1 and 3 are also going on in tandem, and when you get to a certain point, you look back at what has happened within the span of 3 chapters and think, was it all worth it? This time around, the main villains are essentially an experimental weapons team known as XO. They are led by Dr. Heinrich Belgar, who is obviously the mad scientist archetype. He's the type of person who won't let morals and ethics get in the way of scientific progress. Everyone has a use, and if someone fails in their task, he'll basically modify their mind via torture until they follow his orders without question. Joining Dr. Belgar are 2 twisted cherubs named Nicola and Kiara. I'm including them here because holy f***, their voice acting is dope. Sarah Ann Williams screams of anger and hatred as Kiara and just, chef's kiss. Take this as a compliment from an aspiring voice actor. Girl gave it 110%. She must have shredded her vocal cords because holy crap. Kate Higgins as Nicola was also incredibly haunting, like gave me goosebumps. Now, I will talk more about the voice actors later in this review as I am known to do, but just wanted to say, holy smokes. One of the biggest problems with the original Valkyria Chronicles was that practically all of the villains, with the exemption of Silvaria Bless, were so over the top that it hindered immersion. I would like to say Valkyria Chronicles 4 doesn't have that problem. For me, the best villains are usually likable, or are at least deserving of empathy. Valkyria Chronicles 4 gives us 2 in the forms of Chrymaria 11 and Claw's Walls. Chrymaria is the enemy Valkyria that you go up against, and as the story went on, I started to genuinely feel sorry for her. Constantly abused and bullied to the point of mental breakdown, somebody give this girl a hug. Whereas Chrymaria is deserving of pity, Claws made me smile. He's the womanizing enemy tank commander who just will not leave me alone. The whole reason why Claws joins XO is so that he can beat Claude Wallace, who he considers his soulmate on the battlefield. In a room full of miserable villains, Claw's Walls is a breath of fresh air, and while I shook my head in dread when he showed up, I was still smiling. When the original Valkyria Chronicles debuted on the PlayStation 3, its mix of real-time strategy and turn-based combat was revolutionary. How do you improve on something without it becoming too much? If there's one thing that Valkyria Chronicles 4 benefits from, it's having the second and third games as mobile ports. By the time Valkyria Chronicles 4 rolled around, SEGA stripped back a lot of needlessly complex features. I say this as a fan of the series. We did not need ridiculous classes like Fencer or Melodist. Valkyria Chronicles 4 gives you 5 original classes and 1 brand new one. Leading the charge are Scouts. They can move the farthest, can spot hidden enemies, and have a good range, but have relatively poor health and damage. Shock Troopers are your muscleheads. They can't run as far as Engineers or Scouts, and as such, they can't really spot concealed enemies. They do have the highest health pool in the game, and if their machine guns don't turn opponents into Swiss cheese, their flamethrowers will certainly make the enemy wish they did. Lancers are your anti-tank units. Get one right behind the enemy and say goodbye to their armored units. While Lancers can survive explosions, they have a limited movement range and will not defend themselves or offer interception fire when threatened by incoming opponents. Later on, you can swap their lance for an anti-personnel mortar, but I personally never use those. Engineers are support units. They almost move as far as Scouts, however they can heal infantry, repair tanks and barricades, remove mines, have multiple grenades, and even resupply units' ammo reserves. Snipers are an absolute godsend when you need a motherfucker dead. Like Lancers and Grenadiers, they can barely move, but snipers can hit targets on the other side of the battlefield.
This time around, snipers get the ability to perform interception fire, which means you better think twice before trying to get close and personal. They also have the ability to use an anti-tank rifle in the event you want to snipe a tank. New to the franchise are Grenadiers. They're slow moving and don't have a lot of health, but they're the only units who can actually damage moving tanks via interception fire. They have an amazing range, which is made even deadlier by the fact that they can take out opponents they don't have direct line of sight to. Simply have an ally spot an enemy, and they now have to deal with being shelled. Grenadiers are an awesome addition to the game and allow defensive countermeasures against tanks. You have the ability to swap between doing more damage to infantry or armored units, but in all seriousness, you need something that's going to punish tanks. Valkyria Chronicles 4 is a turn-based real-time strategy game where during your turn you can spend command points to take control of individual units to move and perform actions. Having main characters on the field can award you additional command points. This is something you're probably going to need to focus on if you want to get higher rankings. The goal of the Valkyria Chronicles franchise is to accomplish the objective in as few turns as possible. This can sometimes lead you to blindly charging in with no regard for danger. That's great if you're trying to be efficient, but a horrible thing to do in actual combat. I said it before in the previous review, but I might as well say it here. If your focus is that the Nazis are maybe you should stop rewarding the player for blitzkrieging. The problem with this approach is that, once again, it rewards you for taking incredibly risky moves which will most likely result in having your troops gunned down. When an ally falls in combat, they enter critical condition. At this point, the player has roughly 3 turns, depending on the level conditions, to reach the unit and evacuate them from combat. If you fail to reach the unit in time, or if an enemy walks across their body, that character is permanently dead and will not be available for use until you've beaten the game. Granted, the player has the ability to issue orders to evacuate critical units, but once again, Valkyria Chronicles 4 rewards you for beating missions quickly as opposed to being safe. Whenever I got a character killed, I took it incredibly personally and would reset the entire mission. This is because I would blame myself for their deaths. Valkyria Chronicles 4 decides to add something more to falling into critical condition. Sometimes when a unit has entered this state, they will trigger Last Stand mode, where they can choose to inspire another unit or stand up and take one last action to move and attack before falling. Frankly speaking, this new option was a great idea. Suddenly players have the ability to get to safety or hold the enemy back before they fall. While I greatly applaud Valkyria Chronicles 4 for significantly improving gameplay, there is still a major issue with gameplay that is horrible to have in a game with permadeath. Interception fire or straight up player controlled fire can occasionally be blocked by invisible walls, or just completely missed because the affected units are too close to properly register. Just like in the first Valkyria Chronicles game, players can issue orders that will award buffs to individuals or the entire squad. These orders will require command points, but if you know what you're doing, you can take out the final boss in 2 turns. You can do some really wonky stuff, like using a machine gun to kill a tank. At some point in the game, you get a naval ship who can give you 4 more orders that will make you incredibly overpowered. All orders are tied to having Claude active on the field. If the enemy forces him to evacuate, there goes your orders and possibly your chance at winning. If it's one thing that I should state, it's that the true unsung heroes of Valkyria Chronicles are your squad mates. Not the main cast, I'm talking about the side characters, all of which have their own unique personalities and special abilities that affect the tide of battle. As a player, it's your goal to factor in things like terrain, enemy formation, and teammate chemistry. These variables can trigger potentials that provide positive or negative status effects depending on the characters. In the first game, you could unlock future potentials for characters by a hidden point system. Performing tasks like capturing command posts and recovering fallen team members would award you more points than simply scoring kills or choosing a selected unit. You would be notified about a character upgrade through a war correspondent named Ellet. Ellet would interview the subject, adding in parts of their backstory as you progressed. In Valkyria Chronicles 4, this entire system of progression is downgraded to character use. Instead of what you accomplished with that character, character progression is tied to how many times you use that character instead. This is a profoundly stupid decision since certain characters will rarely be used. I personally didn't use Grenadiers outside of setting them up to utilize their interception fire as a defensive countermeasure. Assuming you only play the main story quests, you will have to deploy a unit 20 times in order to unlock the rank of Corporal. It's a massive pain in the ass that forces players to grind individual units on top of the experience needed to level up the entire class of units. Grinding these individual side characters is incredibly useful though, since unlike the previous games, when your squad mates reach corporal rank, they unlock squad stories. These are optional side quests that add more in-depth to characters than the original never did. But if you make it a grind to unlock, a lot of players are not going to bother because the effort isn't worth the payoff to them. If you watched my first review of Valkyria Chronicles, you would know that I absolutely love the art style. Characters and backgrounds have a great use of hand-drawn line art on top of 3D models, and the use of cel shading is just amazing. I want to let you know that I dislike games that fall heavy on cel shading like Beautiful Joe and The Darkness 2, but Valkyria Chronicles blends things perfectly. This particular game focuses heavily on a winter-based campaign, and as such, you're going to see a lot more white compared to the lush spring and summer-based color schemes of the previous games. I don't really consider this an issue, so I'm moving on. The narrative of Valkyria Chronicles 4 is told through the perspective of an interactive storybook, more specifically, Claude's notebook. The one critique I have about the game's art is that during the storybook scenes, some of the characters' animations are quite janky, but it's not a deal breaker. The soundtrack of Valkyria Chronicles 4 was composed by Hitoshi Sakimoto. He's a man with an incredible resume of games under his belt and is also responsible for the music of Valkyria Chronicles 1, 2, and 3. That being said, Valkyria Chronicles 4 leaves a lot to be desired. Outside of the main theme, a lot of songs are recycled from previous games. I don't really have much of a problem with this. If it ain't broke, don't fix it after all. I will say that it's a bad sign if I can't remember any of the new songs outside of the main theme. Now, the main theme itself is quite well made and reflects the emotions and themes going into the game. You have an adventurous start, but a lot of the sound feels quite subdued until dropping out and adding a bit of uncertainty into the mix, possibly reflecting the unseen danger the rest of Squaddy will face on their journey to stop the Empire. One thing I'm going to say about the audio this time around is the editing for the storybook cutscenes is very rough. In the first installation, when there's going to be a massive shift in emotional tone, the background music will fade out, allowing an audio transition to the new shift. In Valkyria Chronicles 4, the music will instead continue to play on before performing a hard cut to the shift. This is incredibly distracting to me as an editor and feels very glaring. I wish they didn't do it this way, but once again, it still is a bit of a nitpick. So, before I finish talking about the audio section, I need to talk about the voice actors. The Valkyria Chronicles franchise has been consistent in top-of-the-line voice actors. Everyone from the main cast to the secondary cast deserve a massive pat on the back for their work. The main cast includes Max Mittelman as Claude Wallace, Greg Chun as Raz, Erica Mendez as Lena Shulin, and Kaylee Mills as Riley Miller. Or at least that's who I think played them, because the entire English voice cast remains uncredited. Look, I'm tired of this. So unbelievably tired of playing a game and seeing the Japanese voice actors, the Japanese production staff, the English localization staff, the executive staff, who probably had nothing to do with the development of the game in the first place, and then seeing nothing for the English voice acting talent who breathed life into these characters. Until the day I get institutionalized, you can bet your fishnet stockings that I'm going to call out things that I think are wrong, even if it's in something that I honestly enjoy. When the main campaign is over and done with, Valkyria Chronicles 4 still has more for you to do. Want to resurrect the characters that died? You can spend money to do that in the Cenotaph. You also gain the ability to spend renown points in the Infirmary. The Infirmary is essentially the unlock shop where you get hidden stories and various additional features after you've beaten the game. You're going to need to buy the chapter titled A Steamy Ceasefire if you want to unlock the true ending. Your troops also gain a new level cap of 30. If you complete the skirmishes, you also unlock harder ones which are quite difficult even if you have completely leveled up your troops. You're going to need to strategize if you want to survive. Valkyria Chronicles 4 is a fun addition to the franchise which adds entirely new gameplay mechanics to its already winning formula. While its characters are more grounded in reality, its overall story is predictable and fails to hit the same enjoyable high notes as the first game. That being said, I did enjoy my time playing Valkyria Chronicles 4. If you value gameplay over story, this slightly flawed gem can make a great addition to your gaming collection. So, at the end of this battle, I'm SonicMTD. And war, anime war, never changes. This video was proudly supported by Unsung Heroes of Patreon.
Love you, Matthew. God bless.
God bless.
Bye-bye.
Hey everybody, Matthew DeLeo, better known as SonicMTD, saying thank you so much for catching my video review of Valkyria Chronicles 4 for the PlayStation 4. If you like that video, please be sure to like and subscribe and leave me a comment in the comments down below so that I may grow. If you did enjoy that video, also please be sure to take a look at the links up on this side of the webpage. Up here is going to be whatever YouTube recommends that you want to watch, and down here is going to be my entire playlist of Always Right reviews. If this is your first time seeing me, maybe you want to see more. But either way, I'm not going to take up any more of your time. My name is Matthew DeLeo, better known as SonicMTD. Arigato gozaimasu, and later days.